US President Donald Trump heads to a whirlwind NATO summit at The Hague hours after he announced that Iran and Israel had reached a ceasefire agreement, despite both sides already trading accusations of violating it. Meanwhile, the summit is clouded by divisions over a controversial push for all NATO members to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. While some countries like Germany and the Netherlands are on board, Spain and Slovakia have voiced sharp opposition, citing the threat to social programs. As Kiev seems to be sidelined in both agenda and aid, Zelensky and Trump scheduled to meet, and a lot is at stake. I'm Rana Al. Let's get into In Focus. Trump is making a brief stop at the NATO summit, arriving Tuesday and returning to the White House by Wednesday, a pattern that, according to the Washington Post, reflects a second-term approach: show up to global meetings but don't stay long. After expressing he was extremely unhappy with both Iran and Israel, Trump is set for another whirlwind international appearance. As the newspaper reported, he has long shown a reluctance toward multilateral summits. The Post also highlighted that Trump's relationship with such gatherings is full of contradictions. He enjoys the global spotlight and also the international settings, but dislikes sharing the stage and engaging in unpredictable debates. In addition, he prefers hosting world leaders at the White House, which he sees as a more controlled and prestigious venue for diplomacy, though even those meetings have often defied expectations. For more analysis, we are joined from Washington by Ginger Chapman, lawyer and political analyst. A very warm welcome to the show. And of course, in light of everything that's happening, there's too much happening. Let me start by asking about the ceasefire. Given Trump's recent statement that he was unhappy, how do you interpret his current stance on the renewed tensions between Israel and Iran, especially following mutual accusations of violations?
Well, thank you for having me today, and greetings to your viewers. And what we are seeing is that Trump is realizing it is much harder to stop a war than to start a war. And indeed, it appears Trump thought that this was performative. We could tell there were certain points in Trump's decision making when he met last Tuesday with his National Security Council, and after that, his language changed from demanding unconditional surrender to we need more time to have peace talks. And then, of course, the series of events, the peace talks apparently being a cover for our B-52, our B-2 bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities, and now this ceasefire. And indeed, we could tell it really was a performance war theater, because right after we bombed Isfahan, Trump immediately declared that the nuclear site was obliterated and the operation was successful, and now it was time to move on to peace before we even really knew the results. And moreover, and most importantly, we saw that Iran made a symbolic retaliation. Trump thanked them for giving us notice so that we could evacuate our bases. There were no injuries. And Trump believed that this was a step forward, a gift from Iran to allow America to save face. And now, with the announcement of this ceasefire, we've seen that Israel is the one that was pushing for the ceasefire. They need the ceasefire. They're running out of interceptor missiles and air defense missiles. They cannot sustain or absorb Iran's strikes on Israel much longer. So they were pushing for the ceasefire. However, as soon as Trump announced the ceasefire, apparently Israel unleashes a barrage, a volley of airstrikes on Tehran. We saw this morning that Trump was very angry. He used profanity at his press meeting this morning where he said they've been fighting for a long time. He doesn't know what the F they are doing. So we see that Trump is growing increasingly frustrated as other events are spiraling out of control. It appears that the war in Iran was a great diversion from what is happening to the people in Gaza. They are still starving and they are still being attacked when they try to obtain food at these alleged humanitarian feeding stations. We see that events in Russia. Ukraine is desperate for attention and they are increasingly losing ground. And we see in the United States Trump's domestic agenda as far as the border and the economy. He's had to put that on the back burner, and now he's facing a war within his own Republican Party. We see some Republicans allying with Democrats to resist the war. We see that this ongoing feud between Congressman Tom Massey and President Donald Trump has heated up again. And this is an interesting feud because Thomas Massey has been in Congress for 16 years. He has a great deal of support. He is much beloved at home. We did see that in 2020, Trump did team up with Liz Cheney, of all people, to try to take down Thomas Massey. And Thomas Massey won his election by 75%. So it's
Miss
not even close.
Ginger Champion, despite these tensions, Trump has maintained publicly that the ceasefire remains in effect. Of course, I want to ask you about this ceasefire. Do you read it as fragile or not? And with growing about the fragility of this ceasefire, and how might Trump address this issue with NATO leaders during this specific summit?
Yes, well, the ceasefire is incredibly fragile.
Incredibly fragile.
Yes, it's incredibly fragile. And indeed, as we've seen, there have been exchanges of rocket fire. And this is partly because Netanyahu is in a trap himself. He needs the ceasefire. Israel cannot sustain these hits. At the same time, Netanyahu is still trying to push Trump for greater action against Iran. And indeed, Israel is overextended and Trump himself is in a box. The American people are polling majority opposed to a war with Iran, majority opposed to continuing sending weapons and aid to Israel to continue their wars of aggression. And indeed, the parties themselves, what we have seen is the strikes that America made on Iran did not have the hoped for effect of actually taking out their nuclear facilities. And both sides have different markers for success. For Israel, their sign of success would be if they're able to take out the nuclear facilities or if they were able to create any type of regime change, but they have failed on those counts. For Iran, their marker of success is they only need to survive, and they have. And they have not fallen apart into insurgencies rising up against the government. The people have rallied around the government as they are under attack. So Netanyahu, what we say openly, in particular in alliance with Israel, is that we want peace, we want an end to the nuclear program. However, as the world has seen, our words, we keep changing our goalposts from weapons to enrichment to no nuclear facilities at all. And essentially, when wars start, there are three rules of war. Wars always grow, they always grow unpredictably, and they always last longer than expected.
Okay,
So
according to the Washington Post, Trump's brief attendance at the NATO summit suggests a second term approach of showing up to global meetings but avoiding extended engagement. What does this tell about this broader foreign policy style from your own perspective? And also, I want to ask you about the terms and conditions of the ceasefire and the way that it was the trajectory of this ceasefire to the entire world when Trump came up on Facebook or his social media site, which is a truth, of course, and wrote a post that there is a ceasefire between Israel and Iran at 2 a.m. without anybody knowing anything. Of course, it was 22 a.m. GMT.
yes, well, two very important issues, both at odds. The first, NATO, the second, the ceasefire. With respect to NATO, we all remember the photographs of Trump's first term at NATO meetings where Angela Merkel and the members of NATO are facing off against Trump. There was a lot of defiance and conflict, bullying on the part of Trump to have NATO members increase their spending. So Trump has taken a different tactic this second term. He no longer, he generally does not fly to NATO and put himself in a position where it's Trump against the body of NATO. He has eschewed using government officials, which is why we see he uses Steve Witkoff more than he uses his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Steve Witkoff is an unofficial envoy. And we see that Trump brings world leaders to the White House or Mar-a-Lago for one-on-one, more unilateral, bilateral relations rather than dealing with NATO as a bloc. This is important because Trump, his history, in the past, he said, what is NATO for? They are outdated. We are paying too much. They are paying too little. But more recently, NATO has been at odds with Trump because NATO wants this war with Russia. And Trump does not want war with Russia. And NATO and the European Union have been dragging him further in, even though he said he was going to get out. And it appears that Macron, Keir Starmer, France, England, they are willing to use Iran as a pawn to lure Russia into a deeper war for their goal of weakening Russia so they can hold on to power in the European Union. The Russia-China axis in the Middle East is also critical. The European Union and to a lesser extent, America, we want to weaken this Russia-China axis. We see the China in Iran railroad has just started operation 3 weeks ago. This is a great way for Iran, Russia, and China to evade European sanctions on imports and exports. And then to get, so Trump is at odds with NATO. So Trump doesn't really trust them, but he needs them. And we cannot abandon NATO at this point. We have too much history, even though many Americans really do want to get out of NATO. With respect to the ceasefire, we want to know what are the terms of the ceasefire. Trump announced a ceasefire. There are no terms. We want to know, Congress needs to know as a matter of law, is the United States, is America a party to the ceasefire, or are we brokering the ceasefire? We have bombed Iran, so how can we be a broker? But if we are a party to the ceasefire, then Congress has the authority to step in and approve or disapprove of the ceasefire. And once again, since Trump has laid out no terms, we do not know how to tell if anybody abides by the ceasefire, which we see they have not. We do not know what the conditions are to move forward. So once again, this is a unilateral announcement on the part of Trump.
Got your take, Ms. Champion, on this, and I really appreciate, but it was a very what happened was not understood, so just we wanted to understand in this context. Beyond the Middle East conflict, the Russia-Ukraine war remains a top concern for NATO members. It's still unclear whether the US will support language in the summit communique naming Russia as the primary threat to NATO. How do you expect Trump to handle this issue during the meeting?
Yes, well, we do expect this meeting to be very difficult. NATO itself has a lot of internal conflicts, and indeed, we are seeing Putin making specific statements against Friedrich Merz regarding the Germany sending Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine to use against Russia, because this will necessarily involve German intelligence, German soldiers operating these Taurus missiles. So this meeting with NATO is very important to make some type of progress towards resolving the Ukraine-Russian war. Ukraine is losing badly, and there is really, Russia is dominating on the battlefield. NATO is in a weak position because we cannot stop Russia from doing anything despite American and European belligerence. So essentially at this point, we have no cards against Russia. They will dominate on the battlefield, and NATO is trying now to jockey for position in the Black Sea. And Trump desperately wants to de-escalate the situation so he can pivot away from Russia, ostensibly towards China, which America believes is our greatest threat on an economic level. However, we do see that this is all entwined because our actions against Iran are strengthening the Russia-Iran-China relationship. So this meeting with NATO may be a last attempt for NATO to reassert any hegemony, any dominance in Eastern Europe. However, this meeting is likely to prove unfruitful. Very little will come out of it because NATO has too many internal conflicts. They are in a log jam. They're gridlocked,
Ginger
and events are going to happen.
Champman, of course, I wanted lawyer and political analyst. I wanted to spend more time with you to know more, of course, of your informative intellectual knowledge and your insights. Thank you very much for your insights and your time. I really appreciate you being with us in today's episode of In Focus. And now, dear viewers, we move on to the main issues on the agenda of this NATO summit. According to the New York Times, NATO's annual summit in The Hague is marked by internal divisions over defense spending and uncertainty surrounding U.S. commitment under President Trump. Trump's unilateral announcement of a ceasefire between Iran and the Israeli occupation has shifted attention away from Ukraine, which is no longer central to summit discussions. Meanwhile, Trump's push for a controversial 5% GDP defense spending target has met resistance, most notably from Spain, which says the demand threatens its welfare state. Trump's refusal to clearly commit to NATO's Article 5 has deepened European unease about United States' reliability. While NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte insists on unity and downplays Ukraine's reduced spotlight, others warn that the alliance risks losing focus and relevance. The summit reflects the alliance's struggle to stay united amid shifting global crises and diverging strategic priorities, according to the New York Times. For more analysis, we're joined from Brussels by Nicholas Williams, former NATO official. A very warm welcome to the program, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today to discuss this issue. The NATO summit is focused on a controversial goal 5% of GDP defense spending. Spain and Slovakia call it unreasonable and a threat to the welfare state. How realistic is this target for all member states, sir?
Well, it's very unrealistic, but it would have to be achieved over time, and it would have to be considered as a goal, not a firm commitment or a firm promise. That was the case of the 2% agreed in 2014. It was a goal to be striven towards, but not a firm commitment. And so I think with a bit of flexibility, all NATO countries will increase their expenditure. But if the United States insists on the letter of the commitment, then I think they will be disappointed.
Trump told reporters that U.S. commitment to NATO's Article 5 depends on your definition. How significant is this ambiguity, and could it undermine the deterrent power of this alliance?
Yes, Article 5 is at the heart of the alliance. It's at the heart of the transatlantic relationship and transatlantic unity. The actual wording of Article 5 is conditional, a bit ambiguous. It doesn't commit anyone to do anything specific except to help as far as they can a country, an ally under attack. But in order to deter Russia or deter an enemy, then it has to be considered as cast iron. It has to be considered as almost automatic. And this is what Trump has avoided doing. He regards it as conditional, but the allies want to more firm commitment from the United States.
Zelensky will reportedly meet with Trump in The Hague. What are your expectations from such meeting, given the past fallout between the two presidents?
Well, it's significant, of course, that unlike the summits of the past few years, Zelensky is only being invited to a dinner and to bilateral meetings. He's not in a dedicated meeting on Ukraine. And the Americans, Trump didn't want a dedicated meeting on Ukraine, but he has accepted a meeting with Zelensky. Zelensky has tried his best after this disastrous, catastrophic meeting in the White House, which we all remember. He's tried his best to do as much as the United States wanted. He's committed to a ceasefire. He's behaved himself, as it were. He hasn't criticized the Americans. He's been grateful to the Americans. So he will try to remind Trump that he is following in the line of the United States, but he needs more help and more assistance.
Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth argue Europe drains U.S. resources. How influential are these voices in shaping Trump's foreign policy, and could they accelerate a U.S. retreat from NATO?
Well, as ever, it's difficult to work out what President Trump thinks and who influences him. He believes, of course, that the Europeans are cheating the United States. And this is why the Europeans and the Secretary General of NATO are saying, well, yes, you're right, we're not cheating, but we need to spend more on our own defense. So as long as you are committed to our defense, we will spend more and do assume the greater burden. But President Trump likes certain countries in Europe. He likes Poland. He likes some Eastern Europeans. And I think his problem is the institutional framework of NATO, not certain Europeans. So I doubt if the United States will pull troops out of Poland, for example. But they will possibly pull troops out of some troops out of Germany, for example. But who knows? He doesn't understand. NATO is a collective organization for defense. You can't pick and choose between them.
That was Nicholas Williams, former NATO official. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights, informative knowledge, and your intellectual knowledge, and of course, for adding value to today's episode. That wraps up our episode for today. For In Focus, stay tuned for more updates on Qnews. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned.